Gay. Great to have Rob and Gay with us. Always great to see them. Okay, decided I would go ahead with the second part of the sermon I started last week. I think this is there's a saying in preaching circles, a good sermon's worth repeating and a bad one you never should have preached in the first place. So I think this is a useful one. It always encourages me when I use it, so I don't feel bad about repeating it. It has been quite a while since I did repeat this one. Okay, in part one we looked at a couple of aspects of how we can learn to fly, and we're meaning that in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense. First one was to be a problem solver. God has set everything up so there are no real disadvantages to us to really trying our best, no matter what the opposition is or no matter what the difficulties involved are. We may not be able to solve every problem, but nothing will overcome us, we promise that. And the second one was turn weakness into strength. I really believe this is an important one. Whenever I see someone who is really performing well in some sport, they never got to that stage simply because they were born as a natural excellent athlete. If you go back into their training, they trained extremely hard. Paul even uses the idea of training for someone who's learning to box. You've got to equip yourself with the skills you need to accomplish any particular job. And to do it in an extremely good way, that means a lot of training. That applies in the physical sense, but it seems to me what we are trying to accomplish is even more important. So surely for us, when you look at the benefits we gain by being good at what we do, it's much more valuable for us to put in that work than for an athlete to put in the work. We will gain eternal benefits, and we will add up to a great treasure in heaven. That's what we're working towards. We may all be saved, but the more we're able to do in this life, I believe the more treasures we will gain in heaven. Okay, the third part, which I didn't get on to last week, is basically, I've titled it, Keep Praying and Don't Give Up. And I believe this is also fundamentally important to our success as a Christian and in a lot of endeavours that we have. The passage I'm going to look at is Luke 18, from verse 1 through 5. And he told them a parable to show them that they must always pray and not be discouraged. And the word discouraged there, which is pretty obvious, but the meaning behind it seems to be, if you're discouraged, you give up on a chosen goal. That seems to be the meaning of that particular word. So Jesus said there was a certain judge in a certain town, so he's not talking about a specific person, he's generalizing, who did not fear God and did not respect people. Now, in those days, especially if someone didn't fear God, that means their morals were not based on any religious foundation. In other words, they had very few, what we would say, morals. They were out for themselves. So this particular judge, he didn't fear God and he did not respect people. He wasn't scared of people, what people would do to him. Verse 3, and there was a widow in that town, and she kept coming to him saying, grant me justice against my adversary. And he was not willing for a time. In other words, the woman kept coming back, give me justice. Can't be bothered with you, woman, go away. Maybe she didn't bring a bribe. She wasn't influential enough. She couldn't do anything for him in repayment for him giving her the justice that she was asking for. She didn't have anything to offer the judge, so he said, go away. But she just kept coming back, give me justice from my adversary. And he was not willing for a time, but after these things he said to himself, even if I do not fear God or respect people, yet because this woman is causing trouble for me, I will grant her justice, so that she does not wear me down in the end and by her coming back. So the situation is, in this case, the squeaky wheel gets the attention. Because this woman kept coming back, in the end the judge said, look, this woman, what I'm going to get out of giving this woman justice is getting rid of her. She won't be bothering me anymore. So finally, the woman pestered the judge enough so that it actually was in his interest to give her justice. So in the end he said, okay, I'll give you what you want. When it says give justice, obviously the woman was asking for something legitimate and correct. So he eventually gave her that correct judgment that she was after. Now the interesting thing to me is in verse 6. And the Lord said, so now that Jesus is giving an application to this situation for us. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge is saying. He's not saying this is a representative of God. What he's saying is, look at the situation between the woman and the judge. And especially in the end, what caused the judge to give the woman what she was asking for. So the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge is saying. We need to concentrate on that aspect of it. Verse 7, and will not God surely see to it that justice is done to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? And will he delay towards them? I tell you that he will see to it that justice is done for them soon. Okay, so the application he puts on it is, in a sense, that God will end up acting a little bit like the unjust judge. We can't compare the unjust judge to God, but the application is, if we keep bothering God, if you like, God will eventually answer our prayers. Now, why does it talk about justice all the time? One reason is that the woman is looking for justice. So the context of the situation is the woman looking for justice. So he's carrying on that idea when it comes to the Christian application. But the other thing is, what is justice? We tend to think of it as someone has defrauded us, we take them to court and we finally get what we should have got. The judge decides that person should have given us the money back or whatever it is. But in fact, justice really means getting our rights. From the point of view of a Christian, what are our rights? In other words, what has God promised us as Christians? Those are our rights. God has promised us love, kindness, forgiveness, an abundant life. We can list all sorts of promises. To me, for the Christian, that's what justice is. That we are able to obtain in this life what God has promised us that we should have. He actually hasn't promised us riches. He hasn't promised it that things will always work out correctly when we deal with the world. He hasn't promised that. He's made different promises to us. But I basically think these promises are more important. So when he's talking about will not he give justice to his children, it's actually talking about quite a wide aspect of our life. If we go back to the first verse, and this is what this passage is all about. And he told them a parable to show that they must always pray and not be discouraged. And the whole rest of the thing is just about reinforcing that. This is a reason why, if you don't immediately see the answer to your prayer, you need to keep on praying. The rest of the parable is about that. But the overall point of the parable is we should always pray and not be discouraged. That's the whole point. Never give up praying. That's what he's saying. Now, another verse that I think is really important for us to understand when it comes to prayer is Mark 11 and 24. For this reason I say to you, whatever you pray and ask for, believe that you have received it, and it will be done for you. Now, this is illogical to the human brain. This says at the point you ask God for something in prayer, at that point, actually believe in your heart that God has already given it to you. And that's illogical to us. And yet that's what we're called upon to do. I mean, I've got to believe it's true. God knows what we need before we even ask him. But I think there's another important aspect of it too that we sometimes overlook. If we already believe that God has answered a prayer for us, we should at least go out and look for the answer. I think so often when we think God hasn't answered our prayers, it's because we haven't gone out and looked for the answer. God won't always answer our prayers exactly as we ask them. But he does promise us that he will always give us what we need. So somehow, he's promised us here there is an answer to your prayer out there. So we need to look for that answer. And I think that's fundamental to gaining confidence in the whole process of praying. If we never look for a prayer, we'll never see the answer. I was terrible at finding stuff when I was a kid. It's all wrapped up with the way my eyes work, you know. But I'd always, if I wanted something badly, I'd just ask Mum to find it for me. If I went ahead and tried to find it, I often wouldn't find it because it was just too much effort to find it. So I'd give up and either find something else to do, or if I really wanted, ask Mum to find it. But funny thing, when I became a Christian and I read that passage about seeking, you will find, I thought, well, maybe I should try applying that. And it's remarkable how many things turned up that I hadn't seen before. It's the same basic idea. If we're actually looking for something, we greatly increase our chance of actually finding it. But if we think, oh, well, in hope I'll ask the prayer, maybe God will answer it. I think that shows very much lack of faith on our part. So we've got to go out and look for it. Now, I've got a small section here. What about when God doesn't seem to answer our prayers? We've looked and we've looked and we've looked, and it just seems like the answer isn't there. I think there are a great number of reasons why we don't get the actual answer that we want. But I believe if we're looking for the answer, we will actually find the answer. Sometimes it will make us realize that the answer actually is no. But at other times we'll see the answer, although we haven't immediately got what we were asking for, we may be able to see why or what's behind not actually getting an answer to that prayer. And I've written down just a few of these. One may be the timing for that prayer is wrong. There could be all sorts of things behind this. But if God gave you the answer to this prayer now, that would mess something up for someone else, another Christian. Could be anything, but the timing is wrong. What's the solution to that? Well, keep praying till the timing is right. Just keep praying. God knows when the timing's right. You may not know. You want it now. We're all the now generation. One of the strongest characteristics of my wife. She wants it now. But for a lot of things, it may not be now. But if we keep praying, eventually the timing will be right and God will give us what we need. Another possible reason we haven't got the answer we actually were asking for is we don't know enough now yet to deal with that or to have that. What's the answer to that? Well, keep on learning and keep on praying. As you learn, you may realize, well, you didn't need that anyway. But then the situation might click where that's the appropriate time for God to give it to you. You have not grown spiritually enough. And I think this probably applies to a lot of us. Here's a situation that isn't going to be possible for you to really execute in the long run anyway. You just don't have the spiritual maturity to be able to do that. So why would God dump something on us that we're unable to actually cope with? He won't. So our spiritual maturity is not enough. What's the solution to that situation? Keep growing and keep praying. Maybe you need other skills yet to be able to do what you're asking for. Keep training and keep praying. you have asked for something that is not according to God's will. And of course, the answer to that is going to be no. My suggestion here is keep evaluating what God expects us to do and keep praying. Eventually you'll see that that wasn't the right thing, and you'll see what is the appropriate thing to pray for. Another big one, which I think we prefer to ignore, is that you actually gain more by having this problem. As I talked about last week, my problems, I think I've gained more spiritually because of my problems than if I didn't have them. In fact, I think probably I wouldn't be a Christian if I didn't have my problems. So just keep striving and keep praying. And sometimes the answer really is no. So just keep praying. I think if we're looking for the answer, we'll eventually see that the answer really is no, and that wasn't the right prayer. We see that what we looked at in 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul was talking about his thorn in the flesh. Prayed 3 times. In the end, God said, no, that's not right for you. My grace is sufficient for you. And I very much apply that to myself. So the answer sometimes really is no. So how long do we keep praying for something that really, the answer really is no? I think we keep praying until we understand that it really is no. Then we give up. But the whole point of this section is what Jesus said. He wants man to always pray and never get discouraged. Vitally important aspect of our Christianity. Okay, the next point I want to make is to fill your mind with good. And I also believe this is a tremendously important aspect of this process of becoming a truly spiritual, mature Christian. The passage I'm going to look at is Matthew 12, starting in verse 43. Now, whenever an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it travels through waterless places searching for rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came out. And when it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied and swept and put in order. Then it goes and brings along with itself 7 other spirits more evil than itself. And they go in and live there, and the last state of that person becomes worse than the first. So it will be for this evil generation also. Now, this is a really interesting passage. Now, I think we can view the unclean spirit in 2 different ways. Sometimes when it talks about the spirit, it's talking about a way of thinking in the New Testament. Sometimes it's talking about literally an evil spirit, an entity that at one time did inhabit people, but don't believe it does now. For us, I think that first application is the one we can look at. Both would apply, but for us it's the first application. So, when does the unclean spirit for us go out of us? I think primarily it's talking about when we become a Christian. When we come up out of the waters of baptism, our soul, whatever is, our mind, thinking, whatever you're talking about, is cleansed of all sin. Our conscience is made clear. There is nothing against us as far as God is concerned. We begin a new life. Okay, but whatever was pushed out circulates around, according to this, if you like, it's a parable, it's a kind of parable. Goes around, it wants to inhabit something. So it doesn't find anywhere where it can make its home. So it says to itself, I will return to my house from which I came out. And in this case, he was living in your mind. Or if you want, just talk about a way of thinking. That style of thinking, that whatever, that's what was inhabiting your thinking. And when it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied. In other words, it finds your mind, what it calls unoccupied, and swept and put in order. So in this case, we've driven out the bad, but we haven't replaced the bad with good. So when the evil way of thinking, or the evil spirit, whatever you want to put it, comes back, what it finds is the perfect home to live in. You know, when you go around looking for a flat, if you go to one that's, you know, everything's in perfect order, everything's neat and tidy, no breakages, you know, there's no holes in the wall, etc., and you go to another one, same price, place is a mess, the carpets are old, 2 or 3 cracked windows, all sorts of problems, which one are you going to take? You'll take the one that's in good order. And that's what they find, you know, everything's perfect for this sort of thinking to inhabit. Now, if you've ever tried not thinking, you know it's pretty difficult to do. We're just built to not think of nothing. I think Buddhism talks about emptying your mind. I've never been able to do it. There's always something going on. I just don't think we're built to completely empty our mind, you know. But what you're doing by, if you like, sending out the bad but not replacing that with positive thoughts, you in a sense are creating a vacuum. And you know what happens with a vacuum? As soon as there's a hole, it'll suck something into it. And that's the case with our thinking. If we've got rid of the bad but we haven't positively replaced it with something to take up that space, if you like, then that leaves us open for all sorts of other influences. So in this case, the person ends up actually being worse off than he was before he got rid of all the bad thinking. So what's the application of this? When we become a Christian and we come out of those waters pure, a clear conscience, everything as it should be as far as God's concerned. We've got rid of that bad. We've got to replace the bad with something to take up that space. And we know from other teachings that that is good. We've got to replace our old thinking with the new thinking. We've got to be thinking about what's good, what's right, what's correct, all the things that Jesus is trying to teach us to do. Unless we fill our mind with those good things, we're opening ourselves up for that evil influence to come back. And believe me, that happens to a lot of people who become Christians. I've got lots of friends who at one stage were very enthusiastic Christians. Now they've completely rejected the whole thing. They didn't replace the thinking with what would repel that evil influence, and they allowed it back into their lives. So, what actually do we replace that thinking with? That's described in Philippians 4 and verse 8. Finally, brothers, which finally usually means of very much importance, can be firstly or finally. Finally sums up usually everything that he's been saying in a particular passage. So finally, brothers, whatever is true. And he's not talking about alternative truths here, he's talking about real truths. Whatever things are honourable. To me, that's kind of a beautiful description. There are a lot of things that are honourable and some things that are not honourable. I know people, or in some translations translate this noble, and I think that's another good word we could use here. Got a particular friend in the States, I think he's the epitome of this. I just love keeping his company. We made a point of going to see him when we were in the States. So whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever things are right, or you might say correct, whatever things are pure, in other words, not a diluted form of something that started off good, but it's been mixed with other things and now it's not pure. Whatever things are pleasing in the true sense. Whatever things are commendable. If there is any excellence of character, this is one part that I really love. I think we should be really, if you like, preoccupied with excellence. Mediocrity is not a good thing. So whatever is of excellence of character, and of anything praiseworthy, think about these things. Did I say this process was going to be easy? I don't believe I said that anywhere last week, or certainly not going to say it this week. This is not easy. Our mind tends to constantly run to things that are not, because sometimes those are the things that grab our attention. But as spiritual beings, what are we supposed to develop in our mind? And that's these sort of things. There's something happened down there. Oh, what a terrible thing that was. Do we have to fill our mind with those sort of things? I don't think we do. We choose what we allow to influence us in our life. Why allow something that's going to be detrimental to us, to our thinking, to our well-being, to our happiness, to our joy, whatever? Why allow that to gain a place in our mind? You can always look at a bad situation and take a good thing out of it. Why not take the good out of it? Because that's what you'll benefit from. I'm going to have to finish off on Proverbs 4 and verse 23. With all vigilance, keep your heart, for from it comes the source of life. In other words, what determines whether we enjoy life or whether we don't enjoy life is the state of our heart. And there it's not talking about the mechanics of our brain. It's talking about the thought processes that go on in our brain. Our thinking, our desires, the things we love, the things we respect, the way we view life. With all vigilance, keep your heart, for from it comes the source of life. Now, I'm sorry, I am going to have to finish there. I don't know where time goes. Now, I'm going to just finish off by going back. This is the last verse you've got on your sheet. Luke 18 and verse 8. We looked at the first part where it talks about the unjust judge. But notice in verse 8, I tell you that he will see to it that justice is done for them soon. In other words, he's going to get around to it reasonably quickly. It's not in general going to be years. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, then will he find faith on the earth. Jesus can talk about the principles that drive us in life, the principles that will benefit us in everything that we do, the way of life we're supposed to have as a Christian. We can read all the passages in the Bible and we can quote them by heart, but if we don't trust what Jesus tells us and do them, they're not going to do us any good. It's no good me talking about these things if we don't apply them in our life. That's what he's talking about. Nevertheless, when Jesus comes, will he find faith on the earth? Will he find people who truly trusted what he said, and because they trusted what he said, they put them into action? Doing them's the key, not learning about them, not only thinking about them. The key is to actually doing them and putting them into practice in life. We're not going to benefit from them unless we do them. Okay, I'm going to have to finish there. I believe I will carry on next week. I appreciate your attention.